cet épisode un peu particulier de la web-série Face cachée, puisqu'il s'agit d'un épisode nomade, je suis allé à la rencontre d'un homme extraordinaire, qui a consacré toute sa vie à la connaissance et à la protection de l'un des groupes d'espèces sans doute les plus injustement conspués du règne animal. Parce qu'il a passé toute sa carrière à les photographier, il est sans doute celui qui, sur la planète, connaît le mieux les innombrables visages de ces mammifères hors normes, dotés du pouvoir de se déplacer dans l'obscurité la plus totale, passant le plus clair de leur temps perchés à l'envers, attendant de pouvoir déployer leurs ailes pour accomplir naturellement ce qu'aucun autre mammifère, à part eux, n'a jamais réussi à faire. S'envoler et rester dans les airs. Comme les autres animaux, ces mammifères sont nos cousins. Ils sont nos proches. Loin de nous éloigner, même nos différences nous rapprochent, tant ces animaux paraissent représenter des versions bizarres, des versions inversées de nous-mêmes. Alors que semblent avoir disparu à jamais les merveilleux spectacles de pigeons migrateurs striant le ciel de leurs nuées, ou les colonnes de bisons transhumants à travers les plaines, grâce à la passion de cet homme, un animal peut encore faire son show les soirs d'été à Austin, au Texas. Cet homme, c'est Merlin Tuttle. Et l'œuvre de sa vie, c'est d'avoir sauvé ce qui allait devenir la plus grande colonie urbaine de chauves-souris au monde.
Hi, I'm Merlin Tuttle, and I founded Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation because bats, now more than ever, need help.
What is that squeaky sound?
Well, people just fear most what they understand least. And since bats are active only at night, and most of them are small, difficult to see, fly erratically, we just automatically fear them. In parts of the world where bats are large, up to almost 6-foot wingspans, and hang right out in the open in the trees in the daytime, people don't fear them. They only fear them where they're tiny little things that are the least likely to be of any threat, and yet they're feared just because they're not understood. Well, at that time, everyone had been warned that the bats were mostly rabid, dangerous, would attack people, give them rabies, and people were rightfully frightened. News headlines from coast to coast in America were claiming that these bats were dangerous, and people wanted to get rid of them. They were signing petitions to have them eradicated. A lot of fear seems to have originated in Europe but it's much worse in the United States now than it is in Europe. Because here we have big drug companies that make great profits scaring people needlessly about rabies. They come up with this idea that a bat may sneak up on you and bite you in your sleep and you not even know it, and then you die of rabies. The odds of that are so small as to be virtually zero. And here in the United States, people are told that nearly all human cases of rabies come from bats. That's true, but it's just 1.5 people per year out of 300 million. It's one of the rarest causes of disease in America. You are vastly more likely to die in an auto accident driving to work, to die from an attack from a neighbor's dog, or even from a bee sting. I have spent more than 60 years in close association with bats. I have never seen a single aggressive bat. I have never been able to document a case where someone was clearly attacked by a bat. And I've been surrounded by millions at a time, days at a time, while I worked studying them in caves. You'd think that by now I would have seen an aggressive bat, maybe be attacked by a bat, if that was a possibility.
Oh, yeah? I think we got a video, but one was peeking out from the bottom there.
Yeah, the one with the little...
I think there's a lot of mythology surrounding bats. They've been associated with vampires, they've been associated with night, with darkness, which I think makes people afraid of them. They've always been made into, like, movie villains, in a way.
As a curator of bats, have you ever been attacked by one of them?
Never, never. Oh, it's a total myth. It's a total myth. I think people get afraid of bats because they do like to swoop near your head when they're hunting, but that's because you have bugs around you and they're hunting the bugs. So they're really doing you a favor.
I'm going to try another one. Oh, your mouth is moving. Is there something in there from that last mealworm? How about this? Okay, all right, now you're getting it too. Oops. It takes them a while, but they get very enthusiastic about mealworms after the first few.
In Eastern Europe, in a couple of countries, there are myths about if a bat gets in, and it's always women's hair. If a bat gets in your hair will fall out, or you will have, it'll be a bad omen, you will have bad luck, or, all the way up to death. So bats in your hair, which doesn't really happen, or at least rarely. So, and so we think of things like, bats are blind, they're going to run into me. And we think all bats have rabies. I think that's the most common myth, and it's the first thing people think about and worry about. And while you need to respect any wild animal, that extreme fear is just not necessary.
Learning to live in harmony with nature is extremely valuable for us because as we expand our population, pretty soon bats and other wild animals are going to have no place else to live but near humans. We started out sharing caves, cavemen and bats. Then we moved to thatched huts that bats love to share with people. And now we still have bridges in places like Austin, Texas, where we have 1.5 million bats living in one bridge. There's no question about it. The more people know about bats, the better they like them, the more they want to protect them. Ignorance is the #1 enemy of all bats. Here in Austin, we have far more bats than humans. We have millions of bats and probably not even 1 million humans. And in 100-year history, we still haven't had a single person contract a disease from a bat.
What's your name, please? Penny. So Penny, why are you here?
I'm here to see the beautiful bats. I love that they eat all the insects and, you know, keep us safe from the insects, and I just love their eyes. They've got these big eyes. They're very good for our ecology, and they, you know, obviously they eat the bugs, and they're neat to see, and I love how they fly really erratically, you know, kind of interesting. You don't know which way they're going to go.
People persecute and kill what they fear and protect what they see to be valuable. And it's crucial that people understand not only that they don't need to fear bats, but they understand the value. I raised some of the early funds that covered studies to discover the importance of bats. Here in Texas, our free-tailed bats, for example, the ones that live right here in Austin, can be incredibly valuable. Just one bat can fly thousands of feet above ground in a single night, intercept invading moths migrating north out of Mexico, and eat enough of them to prevent them from laying 20,000 or more eggs on crops. Just one bat can prevent moths from laying 20,000 eggs on crops in a single night. That's enough eggs to force a Texas farmer to spray multiple acres with pesticides at a cost of $74 an acre. If people here in Texas even marginally understood the value of their bats, they'd be lined up to protect them. Many times we're losing our bats before we can even demonstrate their value. In Thailand, I was lucky to have a chance to educate monks that owned Khao Chong Pron Cave to the value of their bats before they lost them. Their bats were just being decimated by poachers that were killing tens of thousands and selling them to restaurants for people to eat. Mm-hmm. And I managed to explain to the monks that if they provided game wardens to protect the bats, that their sales of guano fertilizer would go up dramatically, as they did. But also as a part of that, the bat colony, of course, grew much larger, and entomologists came and did research that showed that that one colony of bats was saving local rice growers an estimated $300,000 American dollars annually in avoided crop losses. That one colony, the guano sells for $135,000 a year, crop pest avoidance $300,000 gain, and they're also become a huge tourist attraction, which is probably adding hundreds of thousands more. So you have a prime example of how just a simple little step toward protecting bats can make a hell of a big difference for a whole community of humans.
Bonsoir, comment vous vous appelez, enfin, votre prénom?
Delphine.
Delphine, bonsoir Delphine. Vous êtes à Austin pour du tourisme, pour le boulot, pour,
J'habite à Austin pour le travail.
D'accord, donc vous êtes une expat.
C'est ça.
C'est ça. Avant de venir, vous connaissiez le phénomène chauve-souris ici?
Pas du tout. J'ai découvert ça par hasard. J'étais en fait même en arrivant, on m'a mis dans l'hôtel qui est juste en face.
Ouais.
J'ai commencé à voir mais que font tous ces gens sur ce pont. Donc
Et
voir et j'ai vu ce nuage de chauves-souris.
Et quand vous étiez en France, vous en aviez plutôt peur? Vous étiez dans quel état d'esprit par rapport aux chauves-souris?
Alors, non, j'ai jamais eu peur. J'ai toujours aimé les vampires, les histoires de vampires.
Ouais.
Donc,
je suis tombé sur la bonne personne. Donc pour vous, c'était plutôt un bon feeling.
Oui.
Et vous comprenez toutes ces personnes qui en ont plutôt peur, qui ne se sentent pas très bien quand on évoque les chauves-souris?
Oui, c'est des chauves-souris, c'est une espèce de sang, très mauvais.
Donc plutôt en lien avec la mythologie en fait.
Mauvaise réputation, oui.
D'accord. Et depuis que vous êtes installé ici, vous êtes venu les voir souvent?
Pas très souvent, quelques fois. J'emmène souvent les amis quand ils viennent visiter parce qu'au final, c'est un peu la fierté d'Austin d'avoir la plus grosse concentration mondiale de chauves-souris. Ouais. Donc on est un peu fiers.
Et si vous aviez un message à délivrer à Merlin Tuttle, vous lui diriez quoi? Avec tout ce que vous voyez là, avec tous ces gens qui viennent assister à ce spectacle.
Bravo, merci. Très bonne initiative. Et vraiment, quand on voit le spectacle de tous ces chauves-souris, on peut être admiratif.
People often think that I must have been a genius to change things and that must have taken me years to do it. But the truth is that bats are very good little ambassadors themselves. They just need somebody to introduce them. And I would go around to leading media people and community leaders and have live bats with me. And I remember one of the leading socialites in Austin, when she heard that her friends were supporting my bat conservation efforts, she said, "Oh, what next? They're going to be trying to save cockroaches next." And she was sure she would have nightmares for a month if she had to look at a bat. But finally she got really curious because her sophisticated friends were deciding they really liked bats, and they were talking to her a lot about them. So she finally came out to an event where we were having a party and introducing people to bats. And when I first showed her a little free-tailed bat, the kind we have in the bridge,
so cute,
just in my hand looking out, her first exclamation was, "Oh my, he's so cute!" And in fact, one of my straw-colored flying fox mascots I had in those days became one of her special friends, and she was always wanting me to bring that bat by so she could say hi to him.
Yes.
But truthfully, all I had to do was show people the reality of what bats were like, show them what gentle, actually, I started to say cute animals they are. We generally look at animals that have big eyes, small ears, small nose, not too fat. Those are the cute ones. But stop and think. We love elephants. Yeah. Their ears are too big, their eyes are too small, their nose is too long. Everything's wrong with elephants, and we love them. And it's the same thing with bats. We start to understand their sophistications and why they're the way they are, and understand their value, and it's easy to like them. And so it was just like creating a wave of ripple, and it took very little time to convince the people of Austin that bats were wonderful, safe, valuable neighbors.
Dracula. The very mention of the name brings to mind things so evil. But no, this is no dream. This is Dracula, the original terrifying story of a maniac and a man who lived after death, lived on human blood, took the form of a vampire bat, and lured innocent girls to a fate truly worse than death.
What happened? It was trying to get in the window. A big bat. Oh, it was awful.
Vampire control in Latin America is a very difficult issue. The problem is that there is indeed one kind of bat, the common vampire, that causes a lot of harm to the cattle industry. It overpopulated when cattle were brought in and rainforests were cut down. It is actually a rare species in natural rainforests. But when humans come in with their livestock, it can become a problem. And the trouble is that it's a fairly difficult to find bat that lives in small numbers. But when people get bitten, or particularly their cattle get bitten by a vampire, they go looking for them, and what they find are the insect-eating or the pollinating or the fruit-eating bats that form large conspicuous colonies, and then they kill them, thousands, sometimes even millions at a time, and still haven't done anything to solve their vampire problem.
I am Dracula.
Vampires are really cool animals in reality. They're very, very smart. They're very, very sophisticated. And it's not easy to find or control them. The saliva of vampires has been characterized as being a treasure trove of chemicals, molecules that could be of great value to medical science, not in just one area. They've been experimented with as a possible improved treatment for stroke patients in busting blood clots. But they probably have many more values. In fact, those very animals that we have learned to detest because they drink blood may very well one day help save our lives.
How about that? Yeah, the only truly flying mammals are the bats. And I think it's awesome that they don't pay any attention to people telling them that mammals can't fly, and that when they're young they ignore all that and they just get out and do it. I think that's a great lesson for young people too. Don't accept what the world tells you. Just go out. If you're young enough and you're passionate enough, you'll get out there. You spread your wings and go fly.
And make your own experiences.
Yeah. So these bats, if they don't learn to fly when they're young, sometimes they believe what people tell them and they say, oh, we're not supposed to fly. So they don't ever learn. So you have to get out there and do it before the world makes its mark on you and tells you can't do it.
Never let anybody tell you that something is impossible. It's only impossible if you think it is. When I decided to devote my entire remaining career to conserving bats, nearly everybody thought I was stark, raving mad. I gave up a full-time research career to do that, and it looked hopeless. But by simply listening to people, understanding why they felt the way they did, and helping people to solve real problems, not just thinking that animals have rights and that people should get out of the way and not interfere. When people relate to what you're doing, understand why it's important for them, you can do things that you would have thought were impossible. That's time and time again been my discovery, that people that were thought to be hopelessly against conservation or unsympathetic to wildlife, as soon as they understood why it was relevant to them, changed their minds. And I would hope that what I've been able to accomplish on behalf of bats, which at the time that I began were considered so unpopular as to be hopeless, I would hope that that might give courage to future generations to take on things even that seemed impossible, but in reality could be accomplished with the right approach. For example, when commercial hunters almost caused the extinction of Samoan flying foxes, I went out with a colleague and sponsors to meet with Governor Tuttle to try to put a stop to the commercial hunting. But the first thing I did when I got to Samoa was to go out by myself to meet the commercial hunters. And when I met them, I simply introduced myself as a bat biologist who was very interested in their local flying foxes, and I understood they knew something about them since they hunted them, and I'd like to learn from them. And they invited me to go out on a hunt with them that very night, and I did. I didn't shoot any bats, but I congratulated them when they made a good shot, and we became friendly. And I just gradually asked them questions, and they even bragged. They said, gosh, you should have been here a year ago. We could have shot 200 in an hour. Well, that night they only shot 2 in 3 hours. There's a dramatic difference, and so I'm asking, well, what do you perceive to be the problem? What's happened to the bats? And they readily admitted, well, there are too many of us shooting too many. And I said, well, you know, we hunters in the American mainland were among the first ones to get game laws to protect the species that we want to hunt. And we have bag limits and seasons so that there are always some survive. Why don't you do that out here? Oh, well, just can't seem to get people to cooperate out here. It's really sad, but you know, they probably will go extinct at some point. But in a course of 2 or 3 evenings, I made friends and got to understand their shared concerns. And then I suggested, I said, well, you know, in a few days from now, I'm going to be meeting with Governor Tuttle. What do you think? Would you guys like to have me propose to him that you may need hunting laws out here to ensure that there are always flying foxes to hunt in the future? Oh, would you do that? That'd be great. So when I met with Governor Tuttle, I wasn't just arguing on behalf of conservationists, I was arguing on behalf of Samoans who agreed that they wanted bats in the future. And they got laws passed within 6 months, and friends of mine that lived in Samoa said, oh, you know, it'll never make any difference, nobody will abide by those laws. But they did, because the hunters viewed them as the laws that they wanted. And they even became so concerned that they declared a 5-year moratorium on all flying fox hunting. Yes, if I had just gone there and gone to Governor Tuttle and said this is a terrible thing and presented the hunters as bad guys, I would have gotten nowhere probably. But in the meantime, I can tell you that there were colleagues of mine who were outraged that I, as a conservationist, was encouraging hunting. But had I not found some common ground with the hunters and found where we could cooperate, we would have failed. And the part I didn't tell you about yet is that because we got the hunters to be our friends and cooperate with us, we actually ended up getting a national park that today protects everything from coral reefs to cloud forest mountaintops in Samoa.
So you mean you have managed to create a kind of reserve?
Yes, yes, and it would have been impossible if we hadn't first made friends with the hunters and found that we had common ground. I call it winning friends instead of battles. Yeah. That's the first thing I had to learn when I founded an organization to conserve bats.
Yeah, that's kind of a hard question to answer as far as, you know, the exact time and place, but mostly it started in 2005 when I went to work for Merlin Tuttle at Bat Conservation International.
Yeah.
So Merlin Tuttle is an amazing human being. I had the privilege of being his executive assistant for a few years at BCI. And Merlin Tuttle literally saved the bats at Congress Avenue Bridge and in many other places now around the world. I honestly don't know. Had he not brought Bat Conservation International to Austin in the 80s, I don't know if those bats would still be in that bridge. And thank goodness it didn't happen. Merlin started educating the public even before he moved his organization here. He came down, he realized that this was a perfect spot to do some bat education. So I have great respect for him, and I will always love him for saving those bats.
It's true that in order to be successful as a bat conservationist, I had first to learn a lot more about people. And once I understood that most of us humans agree on 90% of our needs and just fight over a few percentage that we don't agree on, and once I understood how receptive people are when we just are willing to listen to another point of view, to hear and pay attention to what they think and feel, and then that we care enough to try to find a solution for them, that is 90-some% of what would normally be a battle already solved. You make friends that way. And once you've made friends, people actually want to please you, in addition to you perhaps convincing them of another point of view that's important. And this listening, caring, trying to help people, not just animals, is the key to success. Worldwide. Following the same Thailand, the colony twice the size they got protected there. They're now worth $1 million people. They calculate for 35,000 a year and one of them worldwide 300,000 a year and the total right
What conversion example struck you the most?
Well, one of my favorite examples comes from a Tennessee farmer. I approached him one day for permission to study bats in a cave on his property, and he, like most people then, thought bats were mostly rabid and dangerous, and he thought that anybody that researched bats killed them. And so he told me to be sure and kill all I could while I was there. And instead of arguing with him that bats were beneficial and that he should like them, I just thanked him for the permission to go into his cave. And while I was there, I noticed that the floor under the bat roost was covered with potato beetle wings.
Yeah.
And they're quite strikingly identifiable. And he was growing potatoes out in front. And so I picked up a handful of these, and when I came back out, I played a little bit naive and said, you know, I'm studying the food habits of these bats, and I'm curious, do you recognize these? Ah, blankety blank potato bugs. And them suckers eat potato bugs? Yeah, and I see you got some corn too. You know, they eat corn earworm moths too. And how many do they eat in a night? I said, well, a colony the size of yours could eat about,
5 million.
100 pounds maybe. And he immediately responded, wow, that's a lot of bugs. And so that's all I told him. I didn't tell him he should be protecting his bats or anything. Next time I came back several weeks later, he had decided that I don't know how he came up with this calculation, but he decided that each bat in his cave was worth at least $5.
Oh, yeah.
And since he had about 50,000 bats, he calculated that, well, his estimate was that they're worth about $5 a piece. So he was a wealthy man because of his bats. And by George, anybody showed up around there going to harm his bats, and they were going to get out off his property at the end of his shotgun. He'd become an overnight, sincere, devoted bat protector just because he found that they were valuable to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on the night. Tonight I don't think it's going to be the best spot. They seem to really understand probably a tremendous amount about meteorology. I've just recently been trying to predict where the bats are going to fly so I could get some great pictures of columns of them going out to feed at night. And they, on some nights, climb thousands of feet above ground, catch tailwinds and go 100 miles an hour nearly to distant feeding places, and then probably ride tailwinds in the opposite direction coming home. So they know that by shifting altitude, they can catch the right winds to go faster and less costly to the places where they need to find food. And I've also known of sites that bats only use for feeding for maybe 2 weeks a year during a mayfly hatch. And you'll hardly ever hear echolocation sounds of a bat in that area when the mayflies aren't hatching. But the bats seem to remember almost exactly when the mayfly hatch is, and they must send a scout over to check it out. We see right at the Congress Avenue Bridge, occasionally the whole colony, or most of them, will turn around and go the opposite direction of where they usually go. Somebody must have been out that way the night before and found that there was really excellent feeding out there and communicated that.
Nobody's done more to change the public opinion of bats than Merlin. Merlin has done more than any other person on the planet as far as showing bats in a way where they are acting naturally and not being goaded into looking fierce and for sensational photographs.
My pictures of bats began when National Geographic asked me to write a book chapter about bats. I had never taken pictures before any better than snapshots that average people take, but when I went to Washington, D.C. to look at the layout for the chapter, all the pictures that they had put with my words of comfort trying to let people know that bats were valuable and not threatening, the pictures were all terrible. They showed bats snarling in self-defense like they're going to attack. And I said, you know, that's completely unnatural. You wouldn't present any other kind of animal that way. The public would complain terribly and say that's complete misrepresentation. But people didn't know that about bats. They'd never seen a picture of a bat that wasn't snarling because that's just how people took pictures of them. They didn't know anything about bats, and a photographer would just grab one and hold it in front of the camera. The bat would think he was about to be eaten, and he would snarl in self-defense. And so all the pictures at one time of bats were just about uniformly vicious looking, and that's how people felt about them. So I complained and said, here I've just written a chapter trying to help people get over their unfounded fears of bats, and you got all these completely wrong pictures. Well, they were sympathetic, so they said, okay, we'll send one of our staff photographers to the field with you for a month to get some good pictures. But it's difficult to take bat pictures. So he came to the field with me, but in a month's time he only got about 3 pictures that were useful. And so at the end of that time, I had been trying to learn from him and had asked him everything he did, practically why and how. And so when he left, he said, well, you know how to do it now. I'll leave you my extra film and see if you can get some pictures. And so I ended up becoming the second most used photographer in the book. And it became really exciting when I saw what I could do, and not only what I could do photographically, but what a huge difference it could make with the public in their perceptions of bats. And about that time, I decided to devote full time to conserving bats, and I found that these pictures were the key to success, that people were never going to believe bats weren't vicious, they were never going to believe they did valuable things until they could see it happening.
But, you know, that's remarkable to me that he made a whole career of shooting bats before there was digital photography, and he would go on 6-month expeditions and return back to the United States with not ever having seen the result of a single photograph. And he had to wait until they were developed in his darkroom to see.
He was patient enough.
To see what results he had from, you know, from his work, from this, you know, pouring his heart and soul into this for, you know, months.
Yeah.
And he had to take meticulous notes.
Yeah.
And I think someday those will be in a museum.
It was extremely difficult. I, for example, did a whole National Geographic article in which I never saw a single picture until I got home. I shot 10,000 pictures without ever seeing one to verify that I was getting good pictures. And then I can tell you I was extremely concerned about that before I got home. One of the early, most difficult things I ever did was for National Geographic. They funded, I just called them from Nairobi, Kenya, and said, I've got a great idea for an article, and they wired the equivalent of $40,000 today to a bank account there for me to go do this article. Well, the heat was really on to get a good story for them. And I had to shoot the entire story of 10,000 pictures before I ever saw one. So there was huge pressure. And the defining part of the story was to show a male epauletted bat doing a wing dance, moving his wings like this and flashing big epaulets, white furry epaulets from pouches in his shoulders, and inflating his cheeks like a frog to enhance his call. And then what I had to do is get him doing that with a female hovering right in front of him. That had to be done in the wild. And that can be incredibly difficult. I stayed up night after night, all night long, and you know, I would pre-focus. I couldn't put a light on him when he was doing his thing and focus, or he'd quit. I had to pre-focus on his location, but then a gust of breeze would come just as the female was coming and blow him completely out of my frame. And I never knew if one of them had a wing over their face when the shot was fired. And I had 2 African assistants holding flashes on 20-foot poles, and I never knew if they had their flashes still held right or if they'd gone to sleep on me.
Should have been hell, you know.
And so when I got back, I had 165 pictures shot where I was attempting to show this. I'd finished 150 of them before I found the one that was good, that would make the article. And you can imagine I was just like a drug addict.
What'd you do today, Merlin?
What?
What'd you do today?
Prepared for taking pictures tonight. Now, after that, I figured out that I could have done it with a much higher degree of success by training the male. Later, I went back and did it again with a film crew, and I trained the male bat so that when he saw me coming, he would automatically go to a certain perch to court. I'd first go and watch the night vision scope to see where his favorite courting perches were. Then I'd get an assistant to use a long pole and just wiggle it close enough to him to make him a little bit nervous, not scare him badly, but nervous enough so that he'd go to a different perch and court there. Then I'd clip out a little bit of leaves that were in my way of focusing on that location, because if you clipped out too many at once, he wouldn't return. And then after we had it opened up a bit better so that I could focus on his location, the assistant would go and make him nervous at the other site, and he'd come back. And so we did this until we had everything all ready. And then we also had to train him to withstand rheostat control lights, because remember, this is a high-speed, a slow-motion video we were shooting. Actually, it was slow-motion film in those days. And so we gradually acclimated him to more and more rheostat control light, and he finally got, by the third night, that bat would recognize our vehicle. We were in a movie theater ground, because these bats guarded streetlights as courting territories, and they were terrified of anybody moving around too close. But in the parking lot of the movie house, people were coming and going all evening with lights flashing things, so they got more accustomed to people. But this bat learned our Land Rover, and when he would see us drive up, he would, wherever he was courting, he'd fly back to our favorite perch to court. And the final night when we finished filming, it was so funny. We turned out the lights, and it was like he quit singing and is like looking around. What's wrong? The lights just went out.
He was the first one to show bats in their natural mindset, where they are not, where they're simply and smiling. But he took pictures of portraits of bats when they were smiling, and he was. Maybe people were aware of that before, but it's still, you can see it in all his photos that all the bats are happy and they're comfortable with him. And
he treated them with respect and love.
Yeah,
and love.
Exactly. Yeah, and that comes through in whatever medium you're using, you know, whatever device you're trying to shoot with. You have to pull that love out of them.
A lot of these pictures I've taken couldn't be done if you didn't acclimate or train the bat. And I often just am gradually approaching bats that are roosting or something and taking my time so that they get acclimated, and I'll be able to approach within a very few feet instead of having them fly away. A lot of people will get impatient if they want to get a picture of, let's say, a cluster of bats, and they'll run up on them too quick to get a picture before they can fly away. And what they get is every bat in that cluster will be, you know, trying to convince you that you shouldn't get any closer, snarling at you. And some of my best pictures have been taken by going to a roost after the bats left to feed at night, putting a camera on a tripod, mounting flashes and studio type lighting arrangement, and then backing off 40 feet away with a remote control and firing pictures only after the bats came back to roost. And I might make just a tiny bit of noise from a distance that would get them curious, and they'd all look up like, what's going on? And I've had bats also in captivity that I trained so that they would go into what looked like a natural roost in a cliff face, and they were trained so that I would come and call like that, and they knew that I had a mealworm in my hand, and they'd come popping out looking expectantly to get the mealworm. I'd pop the picture, hand them a mealworm. And so that's how I get a lot of really extraordinary pictures that you would think would be impossible. But it all comes down to what every good photographer should know, even if they just photograph humans. You gotta get along with your subject. You gotta be nice to them. If you're scaring them, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah. You never want to catch any wild animals, unless you're a vet. If you grow up to be a vet, then you can work with bats. Touch them if you want, but it'll take a lot of schooling. You really have some time. Here's our card. Yeah. Merlin Tuttle right there in the green. He's the man that saved these bats from extermination in the 1980s. That's so cool. He's sharing a bunch of fun facts right now. You're welcome to go ask him any questions, but yeah, I encourage you to go down there and listen, ask him a question or two. If you're curious about bats, he's been studying bats for over 60 years. Merlin's the guy in the backwards green hat with the bat on it.
From almost the time I was born, I was fascinated by nature. And by the time I was 2 years old, I was out catching monarch butterfly caterpillars. And by the time I was 5 years old, I knew most of the scientific names of seashells in Hawaii because my father was interested in seashells. I then got interested in snakes. Then I went through a period when I actually trained hawks for falconry. I was always very much interested in nature and animals in general, and finally ran into bats just at the right point in my life where I made a discovery that was so unique and interesting that it led me into full-time study of bats. But I could have probably studied almost any living thing and enjoyed it.
What do you want?
When you started bat conservation a long time ago, did you expect such a result?
I knew the bats could be popular, but I never dreamed of being this popular.
For me, there was never a point of love at first sight. I wouldn't even say I'm in love with bats. I am in love with nature and the natural world. I believe in protecting as much as possible the balance of nature because that's in our own interest for many reasons. And I am incredibly fascinated with living things. I first got interested in bats when a friend told me about a cave with bats just a couple miles from my home. My father and I went to check it out, and we did follow where the droppings were on the floor to figure out where the bats were. In fact, I have found many new sections of caves that humans knew nothing about by following evidence, seeing where the bats were going. The bats are quite clever at finding parts of caves that we don't know about because that's their only way they can survive a lot of times. But we did follow the droppings successfully, and that evening, most importantly, we got to watch them come out of the cave at dusk. And bats are incredibly fascinating. We know very little about them. I went home and looked them up in a book and found that they were gray myotis, and when I read about them, I learned that they supposedly never migrate. They lived in one cave year-round. But when I went back to show my mother the bats a little bit later, they weren't there. So, you know, how can this be? They're supposed to live in one cave year-round, and now they're not there. Well, I came back time and again and took careful notes and found that they were only in this cave in the fall and in the spring. And that said to me they must be migrating. And so I actually got my mother to take me to the Smithsonian, where I met leading bat biologists and explained to them that the books I'd read said the bats didn't migrate, but so far as I could tell they did. And they were impressed with my field notes and gave me thousands of bat bands and said, why don't you go band the bats and see if you can find out where they go.
So you started this mark recapture work.
Yes. So I got really lucky. Within a month after I banded my first 200 bats, my father had a speaking engagement 100 miles north of where we lived, and he took me along and said, you know, we'll go look for bat caves afterwards, and we asked people if they knew of any bat caves, and they told us about a cave up there. And it turned out to be the cave that my bats were going to. They were not only migrating when they were said not to be migratory, but they were going north for the winter instead of south as we would have expected. And that got me pretty excited, and ended up leading to my banding over 40,000 of these bats over a 15-year, 20-year period, and conducting a huge study that showed that this was one of the longest migrating species in America. Well, I conducted some of the largest migratory studies of bats ever conducted. I banded more than 40,000 bats in the southeastern United States and tracked their movements for 20 years. And I was always absolutely amazed at their ability to navigate over long distances. Over that period of time, things changed dramatically. Farmers would cut down whole big areas of trees and convert them to pasture or crops. We'd build highways, we'd do all kinds of things that would change the look of the countryside, and yet these bats year after year would be able to migrate hundreds of miles cross country to find caves sometimes that had entrances hardly a meter in diameter that I had a hard time finding when I'd park my car within 100 feet and would have to go looking for them.
So you think that they have developed communication skills?
Oh, absolutely. Now, I will tell you that I have never found a young gray bat out migrating outside the company of at least a few adults. And I'm sure that the first time they go to a new hibernation cave, hundreds of miles from where they were born, that they are being led by one or more adults. But once they know the route, they seem to be able to do it on their own. And what's amazing is that their echolocation system only reaches maybe a few meters in front of them, so they certainly can't be echolocating to find all this topography change. It's already been postulated that bats may indeed have pretty sophisticated language. They have more capability in terms of sounds they can make. They can hear a much wider range of sounds than we can.
Comment tu t'appelles?
Anna.
Anna, et tu viens de France?
Oui.
Où ça en France?
À côté de Saint-Tropez.
Tu aimes les chauves-souris ou tu en as plutôt peur? C'est un animal que tu affectionnes?
J'aime bien, je trouve ça joli.
Si on t'offrait un petit doudou chauve-souris, tu serais heureuse ou tu préférais un petit poupée classique?
Mais c'est mieux vivant.
C'est mieux vivant?
Je préfère les laisser dans leur milieu naturel.
Ah, donc t'es plutôt pour que les chauves-souris restent dans la nature? Et là, tu penses que c'est bien qu'elles soient dans une grande ville comme ça, avec les humains?
Alors, je pense que les humains ne devraient pas essayer de les attraper et qu'ils devraient les laisser sous le pont.
D'accord. Et tu penses que c'est une bonne chose quand même qu'il y ait quelqu'un qui se soit battu pour qu'elle soit sous le pont?
Ah oui, ça c'est vraiment bien.
Et tu voudras lui dire quoi à cette personne?
Bah, que c'est incroyable ce qu'il a fait et du coup il y a beaucoup de gens qui viennent voir ces chauves-souris et qui est très content.
Do you think that one day bats may be domesticated like pets, or is it impossible for you?
I don't ever want to see the day when bats are domesticated. That would be a bad idea. It's, in first place, it's very difficult to keep bats in captivity. They are very sophisticated feeders that require all kinds of different temperatures and foods at different times of the year. They're not, and they reproduce very slowly, most of them produce just one pup a year, so it would make no sense at all to try to raise them in captivity as for a pet trade or any other trade. For a pet, the odds are that the one you'd catch most easily would be a sick one, and that's the last one you should be handling or be in contact with. So I would strongly recommend that people not try to keep bats as pets. However, I must admit that they are incredibly cool animals, and that in the brief times that I work with individual bats, I have become very fond of giving individuals, just like you do a dog or another human that you particularly find personable. When I deal with bats, they can identify individual humans that they haven't heard in 10 years. There's actually a case in Australia where a woman named June Took years ago hand-reared an orphaned flying fox and released it back to the wild. It, when winter came, migrated with the other bats and left. She didn't see it for months. And then one night she's in her backyard, and this 3-foot wingspan bat comes flying down, lands on her shoulder, and is just excited as can be, just like a dog that you've left at home for a week and you come home and it's excited to see you, giving her greeting sounds and licking her face. And so it started coming back to see her every night. And then she noticed that it was pregnant. Well, these bats, when they give birth, often take their pups away from the roosts because they're afraid of a snake or something getting them, and leave them with another mother bat to kind of watch over the group of pups. Well, this bat, instead of doing that, started bringing her pup and leaving it with the woman who reared her as her babysitter. And she would leave it with June, and then on the way back from feeding would come pick up the pup and go back to her roost with it.
Incredible.
I mean, bats are just amazing in their sophistication of how they think and remember.
I'd say follow your passion. You know, if you're passionate about bats, go for it. You know, there's a world to learn about them. We're just scratching the surface, and there's such a need to understand them even more. We're in a golden age right now, and a young person coming of age at this time is so lucky to have the tools that we have now to study bats. But so we have the technology now to see them as more than just a shadow that flies by us at night and scares us. Now we have all these things like high-speed videography and thermal imagery and infrared photography and radar and LiDAR. All these tools to study them with, and the understanding of bats is emerging from the darkness now, and they're lucky to be alive at this time. And they should take full advantage of all those tools and learn how to use them, learn how to code and use the software and use that technology, but also learn the bats. Be hands-on with the bats.
There's no question in my mind whatsoever that each bat has its own personality and IQ. I find within the same species some that are very willing to do certain things and some that aren't. Some that are very gentle and some that aren't so gentle. And I take advantage of those personality differences to find the ones that will cooperate with me when I need good pictures. I have had little bats, bodies no bigger than that much of my little finger, actually try to train me. I train bats, but I've had them that small try to train me. Now that takes some
but
real...
But they're trying to train you, to provide you with some information.
My first experience with a tiny bat trying to train me came in Borneo several years ago. I caught a little woolly bat. They live in pitcher plants, and I wanted to show this incredible bat that lived in these pitchers without being eaten. And I caught one in a net out in the forest. I brought it back to my studio that night, and I hand-fed it mealworms, just holding it in one hand and handing it mealworms with the other. And then I released it into my studio. I had no other contact with that bat, and the next morning when I came back to photograph it, when my wife and I came into the studio, it didn't go to her, she hadn't been the one that fed it. Immediately came to me and started bumping me in the nose to get my attention, flying up and bumping my nose. And having worked with bats as long as I have, I figured out pretty quick, it wasn't attacking me, what it was trying to do. But it kept it up, it was very persistent. And there was time actually for my wife Paula to go get a camera and film it, and she actually filmed this bat coming up, bumping me one time or after another, and then as soon as I had a mealworm and held it out like this, it immediately went and took the mealworm out of my hand instead of continuing to bump my nose. Okay. You got to understand that less than 24 hours earlier, that bat had never seen a human, had never seen a mealworm, had probably never caught a non-flying insect, had never had any relevant experience, period. Now, how did it know when I come back in and it's never had even been fed by me except when I was holding it in one hand and handing it food with the other? How did it know to not start bumping my hand, for example, when it wanted to get my attention? Why did it go and bump my nose? I mean, it's totally amazing. And later, I went to Taiwan to help teach colleagues there how to photograph bats catching flying insects, which is a really big challenge. We didn't manage to catch a bat that was appropriate until just literally 2 nights before I was going to leave the country. And I was sure it was impossible to get a bat acclimated and trained properly in that shorter time. But I had to try anyway. So I tried to feed this one bat mealworms out of my hand like I had the one in Borneo, and it wouldn't even touch them. It wouldn't eat, it wouldn't cooperate. I finally released it into the studio and released some live moths to fly around and see if it would eat them. It did, so I knew I could keep it till the next night. It wouldn't starve to death. The next night, I came in when I went to zip the corner of my studio to come in and see if I could work with it. That bat remembered that the night before I had tried to feed it, even though it didn't ever eat from my hand. And the moment I came into the studio, it came up and started bumping me in the nose just like the one in Borneo.
Incredible.
I got a mealworm, held it out, and he immediately went and got the mealworm. And that bat was so smart that all in the course of a couple hours that night, I ended up getting one of the best pictures I've ever taken in my entire career of a bat catching a flying moth. The bat had to be trained in a short time that I wouldn't allow it to catch a moth unless it went to a certain spot in the corner of my studio and hung there, because if it was just flying around, I wouldn't know what angle it was going to come to, and I'd probably get a bad shot and waste my moth each time. So it learned that if it went and sat in a certain place in my studio, that I would get a moth out and it would get a chance to catch it. And all of that from a bat that was so resistant that it wouldn't even eat out of my hand the first night. It was just unbelievable. I'm quite sure now that they're not the only ones, but I would say this, being that they have incredible lifespans relative to other animals, they undoubtedly have evolved extraordinary sophistications about how to pass on knowledge from generation to generation. And that's one of the things that worries me a lot when something like white nose syndrome hits and kills off very large proportions of bats that have to migrate, and they have to know where the mayflies are going to hatch at a certain time of year. They have to know what are the signs that they need to migrate. They have to know the key markers along the route and how to get to the place where they're going to hibernate.
So Merlin, you mean that bats may have culture?
Bats, I have no doubt, are passing knowledge from generation to generation, and without that, they would have no ability to do the things that we see them obviously doing.
So they have a language, they have a culture, they are as us, as we are.
I have little doubt, call it whatever we want, they can easily communicate and communicate well between each other about things of importance. There are countless features that are similar rather than different. They form friendships, long-lasting friendships, just like us. In my early banding studies, I found individuals that would travel together with 2 or 3 other bats, and years apart, I would find them hundreds of miles from where they last were, still together, apparently as friends. I would sometimes find them way out of what I considered their home territory, and I believe that most of them are very loyal to their home area. And I'd think, oh, gosh, maybe I was wrong. And then a few nights later, I'd catch this same group of bats 100 miles away back where their normal home area was, and have to conclude that they were just on vacation outside seeing another area.
Fascinating.
But in fact, this desire to travel and explore has probably been a key element in human success. If there were no adventurers that wanted to go out and experience new things and take new risks, we wouldn't even know about most of the world. And so, you know, I see a great deal of similarity. Bats share their information. They sometimes compete with each other, but sometimes they really help each other. And that is very similar to our situation. They are different, however, in that they hang upside down while we stand upright. They go to work as we're going to bed, and they speak what to us is a very strange language that we barely can even begin to comprehend, and yet they may be just as sophisticated as us in their language skills. That all makes them rather difficult for us to relate to, even though we actually are very similar. So perhaps we might actually consider bats as inverted alter egos. Inverted alter egos. Inverted alter egos. Inverted alter egos. Impresses virtually everybody I've ever met to learn that bats are extremely intelligent and have excellent memories. I have trained bats to come to my hand on call in captivity, release them back to the wild, and when caught 2 years later, they still remembered to come to a hand on call. I train them to do all kinds of things that anthropologists haven't even been able to train wild primates to do. And in fact, we've in recent years learned that bats not only form long-term friendships, share information, even adopt orphans, but they have social systems strikingly similar to those of primates. Some scientists actually believe that flight did evolve independently twice, that it evolved once in flying foxes from lemur-like ancestors and another time from shrew-like ancestors. The argument for the primate ancestry is that Dr. Pettigrew years ago from Australia, a neurologist, discovered that flying foxes all have crossing over neurons, thousands of crossing over neurons between the eyes and the midbrain. And this was always deemed to be the absolute diagnostic character of what a primate was. All primates had crossing over neurons, and non-primates, the neurons went straight back to that side of the brain.
And Pettigrew proposed at that time his flying primate hypothesis.
That's right.
Right.
And we still haven't disproven that. There are a lot of doubters based on assumptions molecular assumptions, but none of them are yet proven. And so we still, it's still, in my mind, very much a possibility that this whole major group of bats actually are primates or came from primate ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
What I find really most amusing about this is that it was so quickly and adamantly rejected that a group of bats could be primates. None of the anthropologists seemed to want to accept flying critters that nobody liked as being primates. But I'm as far as I'm concerned, the case is still out there. It's not closed yet. We don't know that flight may have possibly evolved twice.
Just to be as accurate as possible, you spoke about flying lemurs, but in their cases, it is more gliding than powered flight.
You're absolutely right. Flying lemurs don't fly, they glide. But it is believed that bats came from a gliding ancestor.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at flying fox faces, they look very, very similar to lemur faces. In fact, a famous paleontologist one time mistook a flying fox skull for that of a lemur.
Okay. And yesterday I mistook birds for bats, you know.
Amazes most people to hear that bats almost never get cancer or arthritis. They have these incredible lifespans because they're resistant to things that cause early death in humans. There's so much we have to learn from bats. For example, a 40-year-old bat can still do the equivalent of what it would take for a 100-year-old human to run an obstacle course to get dinner every night. Most animals their size don't even live for an average of a year, but bats can live up to 40 or more years. They're extremely sophisticated. They have to have this sophistication to survive in the complex environments that they live in.
I would say, and we always say this to little kids, we need more scientists to study bats. We need people to try to understand the threats to bats, not only the threats of needless fear from people, but the very real threats that are now killing bats, like white nose syndrome and wind turbines. We need really smart, dedicated people to try to understand that we need to have clean energy and we need to protect our bats.
There are many natural predators of bats, and they certainly do threaten some bats, but natural predation is absolutely minimal compared to the impact that we are having in destroying their habitat, in poisoning them with pesticides, killing them with irresponsibly run wind power turbines, disturbing their hibernation sites when they're trying to get through the winter on a limited fat supply. Those kinds of things are vastly more serious than anything from natural predation. Millions of people throughout the old world tropical areas do eat bats, and it's a serious threat to many kinds of bats. Some have already gone extinct from being too many of them eaten by too many people.
Okay, and in which country, for instance?
Equatorial Africa, Indian Ocean Islands, Pacific Islands, those areas in particular, cave dwelling, and even flying foxes that don't go in caves in Southeast Asia are eaten in very large numbers. I mean, we're related to bats, we're related to mice, we're related to every other living thing at some level. And we think that we're greatly superior and have all kinds of special brilliance and souls and everything that other creatures don't have. But the more we discover about other animals, I'm just amazed at their sophistication and how much they actually think about things and relate to each other and probably to us in ways that we just don't yet comprehend. I simply really enjoy being in the outdoors, and especially in wild places where I can enjoy wildlife, and lab work just isn't for me. I want to be out with the animals, learning about them. I don't find a whole lot of adventure in my lab. Yes, I'd rather go see new places and new animals and get to do new things.
Separation and love over there. Personally, I really like these Pac-Man never give up over there. So I'm going to turn around really quickly. We're a little pressed for time now. Stop it was definitely worth showing you guys.
There's nothing more incredible for me than sitting at the entrance of an important bat cave and watching literally millions of bats pour out in perfect organization, headed for their night's feeding opportunities. One of the most special moments in my experience studying bats came when I discovered 500,000 hibernating bats where they had never been seen before. I had known from band recoveries that my bats were moving in certain directions toward a certain cave in the fall, and for 10 years I'd gone in that cave trying to find my way through a large breakdown of boulders where I could feel cold air going that I knew the bats would need for hibernation. And after 10 years of almost every year going and searching, trying to find a way through that breakdown pile, and in fact nearly getting killed several times in the process, I finally one day looked one place I hadn't looked before, saw a little opening, went through it, looked up, and here is 500,000 bats covering everything as far as my eye can see. It was an incredible experience. No other human had ever been there. No other human had ever seen these bats. And so it was a real experience.
Can everyone hear me up front? Perfect, perfect. Always got to check for that.
Thank you for all the work keeping the bats nice and safe. We definitely love watching them fly out every night. It's good to see. I can't wait till you come back to the Congress Bat Bridge.
You could say I have an addiction. My addiction is to helping people learn to live with wildlife. I so love the natural world, and I so hate to see it being destroyed. I'd like to see future generations able to enjoy some of the wonderful things that I've enjoyed, and I'm just as interested in looking at the future of what people can enjoy because I was here as I am in anything else. I just find it personally really rewarding not only to save something I'm concerned about as a species, but also to help fellow humans of the future. And I probably am addicted to that.
Well, we're assuming that it's not too late to save this planet, that we can make a difference, and everybody knows that we all need to give back right now, that we all need to start giving back to the natural world. We've been taking and taking and taking ever since man was first born or created, so we have to it's time to give back, and the young people can be a huge part of that. We don't think it's too late. We can turn this around, and they can be a big part of that. And we feel, as older people, we feel lucky to have found a way to do that. We wish we had been able to turn it over in better shape.
Well, let's make it 2 words: protect nature.
It gives me incredible pleasure to look back and see all that accomplishment, but I must point out that it could not have been done by any one human. I believed it could be done. I am passionately worked to make it a possibility. Fortunately, there were a lot of other people who caught my passion and made it possible. But it took the help of countless individuals worldwide to come as far as we've come in changing ideas about bats.
Thank you very much, Merlin. Thank you so much.
Si eres pobre te humilla la gente, si eres rico te tratan muy bien. Un amigo se metió a la mafia porque pobre ya no quiso ser. Ahora tiene dinero de sobras por costales que pagan al mes. Todos le dicen el centenario por la joya que brilla en no más porque el carro del año ya no ven con el signo de peso. Lo persigue el gobierno gabacho, pero él no deja de trabajar. A Los Ángeles va cada rato y regresa con un dineral. Es decir, órdenes desde arriba y las cumple a como de lugar. Al peligro ya se acostumbró y por eso no me teme nada. En un Corvette se pasea tranquilo por Tijuana, por Guadalajara, por Los Ángeles y San Francisco y también por Las Vegas, Nevada. La mafia se gana dinero, pero se necesita valor, porque aquí no hay ningún parentesco, no se permite ningún error. Siempre se anda rifando el pellejo con las leyes o con el patrón.
I'm Merlin Tuttle, alias Batman.